Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Smith from the Tufts Career Center. Thanks so much for joining us today for this exciting presentation, Connecting with Creativity, How to Tell Your Story to Alum and Future Employers. Before I introduce our presenter, Leslie Goldberg, I just want to go over a few housekeeping things. We will be recording the presentation, so some of you may want to mute as well as turn video off, totally up to you. As we're going through the presentation, you can enter questions into the chat, either to everyone or you can enter them to Misha, and she'll gather everything for us, and we will have time for Q&A at the end. We did capture some of your questions in advance. A lot of those questions will be answered throughout the course of the presentation. And just know if there's something that we missed or whatever, just reach out to one of the Career Center reps and we'll happily follow up with you to make sure everything's covered. And there is a lot of really good information in the PowerPoint that Leslie's using, but we will add the PDF of the PowerPoint at the end in the chat. So don't feel like you have to, break your hand typing notes or writing notes furiously. So we'll have that for you at the end, so you can just kind of watch along and engage and hear all the great advice that Leslie has to share with us today. So without further ado, we'll introduce Leslie Goldberg from the Film and Media Studies Department, and she's the director of the FMS Media Internship Program, as well as a professional writer, consultant, and coach. Leslie, go ahead and take it away.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining today. I was happy to see so many participants and many faces and names that I know. So let me just kind of give you a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So the title of this presentation is Connecting with Creativity, How to Tell Your Story to Alumni and Future Employers. Primarily, we're going to be focusing on telling your story from a writing perspective. So mostly we will be talking, well, almost exclusively talking about in the written form. However, many of these communication skills, of course, also relate to verbal communication. I know that several people had questions about interviewing, and we will address some of those at the end of the presentation. But keep in mind that good communication skills, whether they're written or verbal, a lot of the same principles apply. So although we'll be looking mostly at writing samples, you can absolutely transfer many of these skills to what you might do in a phone or an in-person interview. Okay, so quick overview of our topics. We're going to spend about a half an hour looking at material, and then we should have 20 to 30 minutes for Q&A at the end. So primarily what we're going to cover is how do you communicate with someone that you want to reach out to, whether it's for an interview, an internship, to learn more about a career, it's an alum who's doing something interesting that you want to learn more about. And the first and foremost, you're probably communicating with that person through writing. So it might be an email, it might be a cover letter, it might be a message through LinkedIn, it might be a follow-up to someone you met at the career fair, but chances are you are writing to that person. So there are four key things that you need to be thinking about when you are reaching out to people. The first is what kind of tone do you use? Developing an engaging professional tone. And we're going to look at each one of these individually. Finding connections. How do you connect with someone who you don't know or who doesn't know you? What is building a meaningful connection? What does that mean? How do you tell your story, and what does that mean to tell your story? It's not just regurgitating your resume, it's actually helping us learn something about you in an interesting way. And then, of course, asking for next steps, whether you want an interview, you want to meet the person, you want to learn about their career, whatever it is you want to do next, how do you do that? So we're going to look at each of these topics individually, both with some suggestions, takeaways, and also examples. So we will jump right to that. Okay, so first is developing an engaging and professional tone. The first thing you need to know when you're writing to someone is, why are you writing it? So you're not just, oh, I heard you're a good person to talk to, but what do you want to do? Do you want to learn about the industry? Are you trying to get a job or an internship? Be considered for a job or an internship? Are you simply trying to build your network within the field? You know, get to know more people who maybe are doing what you think you want to do. Or are you also just trying to find out, what courses do I take? What kind of hands-on experience would I get if I wanted to do this? If I wanted to work in biotech, what would I need to do while I'm at Tufts? What would I need to do in my summers, between my semesters, in order to enter this field? So these are really important questions that you need to ask yourself before you even reach out to that person. And then the second part of that is, who is your audience? So these fall under the writing elements of purpose and audience. And you need to know something about that person. So are they someone really well known in the industry? Are they a recent Tufts alum? Are they a Tufts alum who's been out for 5 years, 20 years, 50 years? So what do you need to know about them? And also, very important, have you met them? Or so did you meet them at a career fair, or did you meet them at a seminar? Or did someone like me give you their name? Or is it just someone you found on your own? And we'll talk a little bit about that later. So these two key things, your purpose and audience, are going to help you figure out who you're writing for and why are you writing. So let's look at how purpose and audience help you figure out the right tone. So here's where we start talking about the writing itself. So first thing is, you can be personable. You don't want to be too chit-chatty, like act like, you know, they're your buddy in the room down the hall. You want to be friendly, but also professional. So that's a really fine line. And I think when we look at the examples, you'll have a little bit better idea. But finding that balance between being professional and polite, but not too stiff. Also, as students, you've probably written a lot of papers and you write with academic language, you know, sort of trying to show everything you know. That's not really appropriate in this setting. You want to write as if you're having a conversation. And again, the examples will show in a second. And be very clear up front why you are writing. Are you trying to set up a call? Did you just apply for a job? Are you looking for an internship? We'll talk more about personal connections in a minute. You may not have a personal connection to the person, but if you do, it's always good to add it. And be brief. You'll hear me say this a few times today. You've probably heard Ryan and other career services people say it. Nobody has a lot of time these days. 3 short paragraphs are enough. So that's a beginning of what's the right tone. So let's look at a couple of examples. Okay, so here are 4 different examples, and what I'd like you to do, so think about this as the first paragraph that you're writing to the person. So we're not yet talking about your resume, you're not yet asking for an interview, you're just reaching out to the person. So what I want you to do is take a minute to read these and think about which ones work really well, which ones don't work, which ones maybe are a little bit in between. So take a minute to do that, and then I will kind of share with you, piece these together and share with you which ones I feel work and why. So you have about a minute to read through those. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to skim them. And again, the presentation will be sent to you in a PDF. So if you want to spend more time with these later, you will certainly have the opportunity. So let's start with the dark blue one on the left-hand side. This one I don't really like because, I mean, it's fine that the person says, you know, I bet you missed time on the Hill, but it's really more about this student's experience being a student, and it's not very clear at the beginning why he or she is writing. So maybe a little too chatty, a little too personable, but a little bit too personable, so a little too chatty, not very clear up front. The one in yellow is actually a really nice example. This is a person who, sorry, hold on one second. You guys seeing that? Oh dear. There we go. Sorry.
Yep, we can still see it, Leslie.
You can still see it. Sorry, I had a little bit of a glitch there for a second. Sorry. So the one in yellow here is, I like the way this student has let the person know that how they found them on LinkedIn and what they're interested in, and says right up front, I want to learn more about your career path. The one on the upper right in the light blue, this person says what they're doing and says that they'd love to talk to you more, but it's a little bit too much about the person themselves, too much about their senior thesis, and chances are the person they're writing to is not going to have time to read their senior thesis. So it's not bad in terms of their interest in what they've been studying, but it doesn't really say very much about how this person that they're reaching out to can maybe assist them. And the last one, the Dear Allison one in green, I like this one because it says something about what they're interested in, using my name. I've learned from Leslie, so obviously there's a personal connection there. Says something about their job, so it shows that the student has done research about their job, about the person's job, and that they already know something, but they want to learn more. So those are a couple of examples of what a first paragraph might look like, both good and bad. Okay, so you've gotten through, maybe you've established a tone, you're professional, personable, without being too chatty. Now, how do you start building some connections? So it's really important that the person you reach out to wants to connect with you. So what does that mean? Well, can you find something that you have in common? When we get to the end, if there's time, I will tell you a wonderful story about this that happened to me, where a common interest led to a job. So, you know, did you play on the same sports team? Were you in the same club? Did you study the same thing? Maybe you, you know, it's not a Tufts connection, but you have some other, you know, you met them at a baseball game, whatever it is. Share something about yourself. You don't need to tell them everything about yourself. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. If you've met before, remind them how you met. Did you have a nice conversation? Did you meet at a networking event? The other nice thing is, if you've met someone before, you can say, hey, I'd love to tell you what I've been doing since we met. Or maybe it's an internship contact that you had in the past, and now you're graduating and you want to see if they can help you with a job. So you might say, hey, since my internship with you last summer, this is what I've been doing. I think this last bullet point is one of the most important. You need to be very specific about knowing something about them. So it's meaningful to the person you're writing to if you've shown knowledge, you've done some research, you know something about the job, the company, the industry. So none of these generic, I'd really like a job at your company kind of thing. Or I heard you'd be a good person to talk to about your career, without really showing what that career is. So all of these pieces combined from a writing standpoint is what we call being reader-centered and not writer-centered. So let's look at what that means. Okay. So to build meaningful connections, how do you be reader-centered? Okay, so yes, a job interview, you're talking about yourself. In a letter to someone, you're talking about yourself. But you need to show some interest in the person to whom you're writing. And again, if you're in an interview, you need to show interest in them. You need to show interest in the job. As I said a minute ago, research is really important. You've spent some time learning about what an account manager does, or you've learned about this particular industry, even if you don't know exactly in that industry where you want to work. But you've done some research before you sit down and ask for an interview or to connect with someone. You know something about them. And you can get a lot of information on LinkedIn. So, you know, to find out what year someone graduated from Tufts, you can usually find that on their LinkedIn page. So that's a great place to start. When you're talking about, and this is true in interviews as well as in cover letters, but when you're talking about how your skills relate to the job, it's not just about you and how how great the job would be for you, but what do you bring to the table? What makes you unique and different so that you are an asset to them? Again, keep it short. I like this last one. I'll give you an example in a minute. Be confident but humble. Don't make assumptions about your candidacy or your experience, how great you are, because that's for them to decide. Okay, so let's look at some examples. So take a minute and give a quick read, and then I will go over these again. Think about which ones you think work. Maybe there are pieces that work and other pieces that don't work so well. So take a look at those. Okay, I'm going to start with the blue one in the right-hand corner, the light blue one down in the bottom right, because I think it's the best example of not being particularly humble or making assumptions about your experience. This person has, done a pretty decent job of saying what they're doing and what they're interested in, very briefly. And very quick to say that they have a 4.0 at Tufts, which is obvious on their resume, so probably not necessarily needed in the cover letter itself. Making an assumption that they would be a good fit. And it's also very generic. This is what I mean about being, generic and vague. So a job as a lab assistant in your hospital. Do you know of any such openings? So the first part is very, very vague. And then the last part, do you know of any such openings? Clearly, the person has not done their research to find out if there are any openings. And also nothing about the person they are writing to. So to me, that one doesn't do a very good job of making a meaningful connection with the reader. Similarly, the other blue one in the upper left-hand corner, the one that begins, Leslie Goldberg gave me your name. That's not terrible. That person's trying to make a connection by using my name. But interestingly, they then launch into their paper that they send with their cover letter, asking this person to read their paper and learn more about the student's interests. And it's all about how it's helping them and, strengthening their experience as an internship. So again, that one makes a decent attempt to provide some information, but it's not what I would call a meaningful connection. So let's look at the one in yellow. This is one that I think makes a pretty good meaningful connection. So the student has done some research, came across the person's name on LinkedIn, finds that common denominator. We both played on the soccer team. We were both in the Leonard Carmichael Society. They know when they graduated from Tufts. 100 years ago. Those are my years, by the way, 80 to 84. I'm interested in a career in public health, and I see that you are working in public health. I know that you're the executive director of the Commonwealth Health Initiative. It's interesting to me. I'd like to learn more. So that one in yellow very briefly does a nice job of connecting, telling the reader how I found you, making a personal connection, having common interest, and knowing what their job is, and politely saying, you know, I'd like to learn more. Now, the one in green is an example of someone that you may know, you've met before. They may not necessarily remember you, but you have a nice reminder there. I met you last fall at the career fair. We had an exciting conversation, da 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 da. And now it's okay. Here's what I've been doing since then, and I'm using a new software. And you know, we had this great conversation. I thought you might be interested. Now, this student sends an article from the Tufts Daily, which presumably is fairly short, probably shorter than the research paper on documentary film. And it's appropriate in this setting because the student has met this person before, and it's just providing a quick update. So the one in green, so the green and yellow, I would say are the strongest here. The two in blue, although they have elements of, you know, appropriate language, I wouldn't say that they are making strong, meaningful connections. It's an attempt, but it's not as specific about the person that you're writing to as it could be. I also wanted to, we had a question early when students registered about connecting with people during the pandemic. So I put this, I hope this email finds you well during these difficult times. So that's a perfectly appropriate salutation to include in when you're reaching out to someone. Everyone knows there's a pandemic, and it's perfectly appropriate to be upfront and you know, you don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the pandemic, but you can certainly say something like that. I hope, you know, I hope you are well. I hope you are managing these difficult times. Okay, so that's making meaningful connections. Okay, so now we're kind of getting into the body of your cover letter or your email. So think about this perhaps as paragraph 2. So how do you talk about yourself so people are interested? So there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. You can talk a little bit about 1 or maybe 2 experiences. You don't have to tell us everything about your resume, but 1 or 2 brief anecdotes about your experience. We can get to, well, what do you do if you don't have experience in the industry? We can get to that later. Try to be original and creative in your language, and that means different things to different people, but it goes back to this idea of finding the right tone. You want a well-written letter. Use appropriate vocabulary. Try to say things a little bit differently than the average person might. Is there some kernel or interesting question that you could ask that the person might find interesting? And again, we're going to look at some examples. And 1 or 2 key stories. You do not need to go over every single thing. They have your resume for that. So what I call this is the elements of storytelling. This is how you engage a reader. You tell them a story. So what exactly does that mean? Okay, so when we think about a story, we think about something creative. When you read a good book, what do you remember about the characters? What do you remember about the plot of a movie? So can you think of something creative about yourself that's going to make you stand out? Don't just use details for detail's sake. So, you know, when you write a paper, you maybe put in everything you know, because it's just to show that you're showing your professor how much you know. Here, you want details that are engaging, interesting, creative. Again, things that are going to stand out that help you be memorable. Have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And basically, that means you're starting with a purpose. You have a middle point to your story. This is where I'm going with this. And it wraps up nicely with a key point or a key takeaway. Like, this is what I learned, or now I want to pursue this further. So you're going through those details with a direction, with a structure, a purpose in mind. So let's look at some examples of that. Okay, so again, take just a quick minute, skim these, and then I will go over them again. And remember also, this is paragraph 2, so you've already introduced yourself at this point. Okay, so I'm going to point out the one that I think doesn't work so well. I think it's pretty obvious in this case. It's the one in yellow. And the reason it's this one about finance is basically this writer didn't really tell the reader any kind of a story or anything particularly memorable, and probably told the reader, if the reader is somebody in finance, they probably already know what spoofing trades are. So this is more like the student is writing a research paper than trying to make a connection with the reader and tell any kind of a story. It's more like, this is what I learned in my class, as opposed to, I want to tell you a story about myself. My favorite of these, I think the green and the 2 blues are both really good. I think my favorite is the one about the between the lines. And this is what I mean about, oops, sorry, hold on, go back. This one where my coaxing me away with my favorite treat, the strawberries with whipped cream, that's a fun little detail that the reader's going to remember. Oh, that's the person who ate strawberries with whipped cream. I like the other blue one because I think it poses an interesting question, and it shows how the writer is immersed in maybe something similar than the reader is, and shows a knowledge of the person, that they were a former athlete and they're currently the director of the Center for Women in Washington. So it poses an interesting question. And the one in green shows something about the reader. About the writer. It's very current day. It talks about, health disparities in COVID, so it's current. And it's also showing how the writer has developed their skills and now wants to learn more. I would say that the 2 in blue are more engaging than the one in green. And all 3 of those are more engaging than the one in yellow because they talk about the writer, about the student, and some things that they've done. And the 2 blue ones work particularly well because they're different. Showing engagement in children's media, using personal connections, showing that they've done their research, and then, having some nice details about what they're thinking about, or watching a TV show and eating strawberries with whipped cream. So the 2 in blue are probably the most memorable. Okay, so now we've pretty much got a handle on what our paragraphs 1 and 2 would be like. So then what do? You've written these 2 beautiful paragraphs, and now what? Now you want to ask for next steps. So from a writing standpoint, be direct. I know a lot of times students are reluctant to ask for something, but you don't really have room or time in this scenario to kind of beat around the bush. Use simple, direct sentences. I would love to speak with you. I would love to learn more about this position. Be passionate, show that you are interested, excited, engaged, enthusiastic. You don't have to be jumping up and down, but you do want to be passionate, show that you're passionate. Be professional, that kind of goes without saying, but you know, please and thank you obviously go a long way. And as I've said, probably in every slide, be brief, keep it short. Okay, so asking for what you want. So what does that look like when you want to take next steps? If you're looking for a job or an internship and there's an opening and you're applying for that opening, it's perfectly fine to say, I'd like the opportunity to discuss this position further. If you want to schedule an informational interview, normally I would say take the person out for coffee. Can't do that, so take them out for Zoom coffee, and people will appreciate your humor. People like to talk about themselves, so there's nothing wrong with asking someone if you can have 45 minutes of their time, whether it's on Zoom or someday maybe in person. And you know, I would love to sit down with you and talk about this further. You can suggest a few times that you're available or ask them to do so. Be flexible. You want to do it on their schedule. Make yourself available if you can. You know, don't give them 3 times and then say you're only available at one of those times. It's perfectly fine to be direct and say, tell them, you know, you look forward to hearing from them, and always thank them for their time, always, no matter what. And this isn't really about asking for what you want, but don't forget to proofread. Always proofread. So many times I hear about students who send a letter to one company and realize that they forgot to change the name in the dear so-and-so, or they have the wrong name of the company in the letter itself. You must proofread. So that's just my little plug as far as writing in general. You always want to proofread. Okay, so that's for asking for what you want. So that's your 3rd paragraph. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, lastly, think of this as your last paragraph. Take a look at these and see what you think. Okay, so I think it's pretty obvious the one in green doesn't say much except that I know I'm going to be a great asset and I expect an interview. So I would say that one is not I mean, it's asking for what the student wants, but not in a particularly enthusiastic or engaging way. It's more all about me, the writer, not, you know, I really think that I would fit well with your company. So I would kind of nix that one. I think the one in yellow is really good. Again, it shows I'm interested in learning more. There's, you know, a polite question. Would you have time to speak with me about your career? The little joke about the Zoom coffee. This writer could maybe say, please let me know a time when you are available. He or she decided to put in a time that they're available, but you could do that, or you could just say, I'm flexible. Please let me know when you're available. And again, you know, all of these provide a thank you, so that's appropriate. The upper blue one on the right shows the writer's passion. The only thing I think this one is pretty good. The only thing about this one is the sentence, I would welcome the chance to further my skills and deepen my learning by working at the Commonwealth Health Initiative. That writer could maybe say a little bit more about how he or she would be an asset to the company as opposed to just it being helpful for them. but that's still very polite. I hope you will consider my application for your policy internship, etc. I think the last one, the last blue one in the bottom right, is very good because it really shows how the student is passionate, a good candidate. I like the sentence, I cannot think of a career more fulfilling than putting my engineering skills to work, helping kids to learn STEM. So that's showing, you know, both, you know, I'm an excellent engineer, and also I want to do something for other people. And so, and names a specific job, the product design assistant job at Lego. So this writer has done a pretty good job of finding a balance of passion, knowing the job, and also showing how he or she can be an asset to the company without making assumptions, and then, you know, politely asking for an interview. I hope we can arrange an interview in the near future, and thank you for your interest in my application. So those are some good examples. Again, the green one probably the weakest of the four, and I would say the yellow and the dark blue probably the best of the four. Okay, so that's our last paragraph. And I think a key takeaway for today is, if you want someone to remember you, tell them a good story. So hopefully some of the things in this presentation will help you to do that more in your letter writing, in your email writing when you reach out to people, and also, again, in your interviewing. So we can, if people have questions about interviewing, we can certainly talk about that. So that is all of my material, and I would imagine that people have some questions. So Ryan or Susanna, I'm gonna have you guys jump in and share some questions.
Yeah, Misha, did you have any questions that popped up in the chat?
Not during the presentation itself, but everyone please feel free to write in questions into the chat, or to me specifically, if you would prefer it to be asked anonymously, and we can continue the conversation.
I have some, should I address some of the questions that I have from, oops, sorry.
Yeah, let's go to that.
Okay, so I actually had a good laugh on this one, because how to approach messaging and emailing alumni who are decades older. And I am one of those alumni, decades older. Well. I think some of the material, I hope some of the material has provided an answer to that. I think that, I know for myself, when I get questions from Tufts students outside of the realm of film and media studies, you know, they find me in other ways. I think that it doesn't really matter that much that you're younger and they're older. As I pointed out in the materials, the idea is, how can you build a connection with them? So if you do research about them, you can learn some things about them, and that can be your point of connection. So the fact that there maybe is an age difference doesn't matter that much. You know, maybe telling them something about what you're doing at Tufts, provided, again, that it's appropriate and you can find a personal connection, again, whether it's a team or studying the same thing. You know, maybe you interned at the same place. I think not to be intimidated by that age gap, but rather, what can you say in your letter to help you close the gap?
I do have a couple questions now.
Great.
So the first one is, how do you best suggest making past work experience personal or more memorable story within your cover letter?
I could start that one, Leslie, and then if
sure,
you want to jump in after. So one thing that, one tool that we use a lot as we help prepare you all for behavioral-based interviews, so just a quick reminder on what those are. A behavioral-based interview is an employer, any recruiter, anybody who's giving you an opportunity, anybody that you're talking to about what you've done, they want to, we can't say tell them a story enough, something that's going to stick with them and really gives a clear and specific example of what it is you've done in the past and how that parallels or has prepared you to do the work you would do in this new internship or a full-time position. So with behavioral-based interviewing, if you're asked a question like, tell me about a time when you were given the lead on a project, it didn't turn out to go the way that you wanted, what did you do in order to kind of re-steer the ship? So to answer the behavioral-based interview question like that, there's a method called the STAR method, which breaks up your examples of skills you used and developed in these experiences, and that will help show how you can prepare for you're prepared for this position. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So again, that's situation, task, action, and result. And if you think about constructing compound sentences and that middle kind of meat and potatoes paragraph on your cover letter, that will be a very specific way to, it makes your examples more rich. While I was interning at Ogilvy, I was tasked to be social chair for the interns in a way that was engaging and professional. I had one of my speakers cancel at the last minute, but knowing an alum who spoke in one of my classes, we were able to partner with them and bring them in. Because I did that, I added a new spin on our presentation, and my supervisor was really impressed with my initiative. So that statement, and maybe it's technically 2 sentences, but if you think about writing in a compound way, so it covers those details, the situation, what were you doing, the task, how did you do it, the action, and then what came about because of that. That's a good way, and that may be in your draft as you're just getting the idea out in the cover letter, and then with some help with the Career Center, we can kind of fine tune that skills match in the middle. But I think that's one of the easiest ways to get thinking. And that also helps as you're preparing for interviews, preparing for networking. It's a concise way to just get your point across and do it in a way that's creative and connect by storytelling.
Great. Nothing to add to that one. That was great.
Thanks.
All right. The next question.
Yeah.
So how do you recommend people kind of write about in an introduction about a position that they're really interested in but don't have relevant experience in or any background in? How do you start that connection in that talk?
Yeah, Leslie, you take that one to start.
So a couple things. One is I think there's a lot of, well, first of all, you have to do research on what that position is and try to find out a little bit more about what they're looking for in. So if it's a listed job, let's say, or an internship. So for example, a job listing or an internship listing might say something about problem solving skills or multitasking skills or working in a team or excellent writing and communication skills, verbal communication skills. So what I always talk with students about is those transferable skills. So, maybe I always like to say being a tour guide at Tufts was my first job in PR. And then I ended up working in PR. So, let's take that example. They're looking for somebody to do something in public relations in an internship, and you've been a tour guide at Tufts. Can you translate what you did as a tour guide, which is being outgoing and having a lot of information and being articulate and fielding questions, being a good communicator, being able to walk backwards. There's a lot of different things that go into being a tour guide that you can leverage to another job. So I think it's really important to be able to read about what a job might entail and think about what you have done that's transferable, not all the things that you don't want to say, I don't have experience in this, but you can say, I really want to learn about X, and here's why these 3 things that I've done are relevant to that experience. That's one. Ryan, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, I think the main thing is just translating. I think it's always thinking about, you always want to be able to draw parallels and find connection. It's not just for the cover letter, for the interview, for the networking. This is going to help you forever. So
Right.
really just think about, and don't hesitate. A lot of students, I should say, every jumbo I've worked with is a really strong writer that, it's just something that comes naturally, at least from the core perspectives. And you get used to writing in an academic format, and making that switch, you can kind of feel uncertain to, all right, I have to be really in depth for a paper or a thesis, but then with this cover letter, it's all this info in a short, fast, quick, hurry up way. Take the time to just jot it out. Like, don't think about the formatting and all that. Just free write it and start on the page and kind of generate those ideas about, all right, they want me. Several times I've gone through, if we're talking specifically to cover letter for job posting, I've gone through with students and just highlighted, all right, here are the main things that keep coming up. What are all the different ways I've done this in any capacity? And a lot of times it's an advisor like myself talking with a student and saying, they may not be thinking about how they help their parents with the accounting for the small business that they own and are really well versed in this kind of quantitative ability that, because their interest is someplace else, they wouldn't think to partner that. But you're developing a comprehensive skill set that's going to continue to grow professionally as you develop. So you really want to think holistically and comprehensively about all the different pieces that make up who you are as a comprehensive candidate. So I think just start with the brainstorm. Even if your cover letter isn't drafted and you're trying out that idea, that is a great place to start, to kind of help build the skills match in the middle, or just sound bites for dialogue. And what really begins to happen is you just kind of have this ticker tape of, like, it's like being an actor and memorizing your lines. Like you're on the train, or you're walking, or you're on campus running an errand, and you just can kind of play this tape back and forth to kind of really help you build confidence in talking about who you are and what you're capable of. So I think it's translating, just kind of starting on the page, doing a match of, like, the job needs this. What have I done that's remotely close? Okay, I have a draft now. One of my career center advisors or professors can kind of help me fine tune that language. But I think starting with the bullet points and just brainstorming to then craft those stellar sentences.
I want to add one thing from a writing standpoint to that. So, and I did touch on this in the presentation materials. I think sometimes students feel that they have to capture everything in their cover letter that's on their resume. And the person who's looking at your resume has your resume in front of you. They can see that you were a camp counselor and you did this internship and you were, the star of the baseball team or whatever it is. They can see that on your resume. What they can't see is what makes you who you are as a person. So, you loved watching Between the Lions when you were a kid. You love eating strawberries and whipped cream. You are fascinated by the dearth of women in professional sports. Those are things that they can't find out about you unless you tell them. So that's what we mean about storytelling. Like, what is the one thing about yourself that they really want, that you really want them to know, that's going to make you stand out? And you might have had 15 internship experiences, or you might have had none, but that doesn't mean that you're the best candidate for the job. Sometimes the person with less experience, gets the internship over the person who's had 5 internships in the same field, because they're really creative in their cover letter and they're really engaging in their interview, and the employer wants to take a chance on that person because they have energy and they know how to tell a story and they know how to present themselves. So I think that, if you can step away from how do I talk about everything in my resume, and think more about how do I tell the story? If there was one thing I wanted this person to know about me when they're done reading my cover letter, what would it be? And one more quick thing, and then obviously I'll stop talking and take more questions. The idea, again, of the transferable skills. This comes up a lot, I know, when I talk to athletes and other students at Tufts, but often with athletes who haven't had time to do internships because they're playing college sports. We have a great conversation about what are all the things that you learn as a member of a team that are transferable to this job. And if you think about leadership and problem solving and commitment and, you know, time management skills, and, you know, we could go on forever. So that's a really good example of how you may not have done an internship because you were busy doing this other thing, but this other thing that you were doing has all the skills that the employer is looking for. So it's again, it goes back to storytelling. What is the kernel of the story about you being, you know, on the lacrosse team or on the ski team that makes you a good candidate for this field or industry or job? Okay, other questions?
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so given all these excellent tips and tricks and just examples that you've shared, we have a question about, can you talk a little bit more about the nuanced difference between maybe sending an email versus writing a cover letter? And like, does the format change at all? Or how does one go about differentiating what is best given the circumstance?
It's a hard one. I always think of a cover letter, you know, as are we talking about like a cover letter that's sent as an attachment in an email or in the body of the email? Ryan, do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, so a lot of times, and I think this can differ from different advisors. I mean, I myself always say, just kind of thinking about how, like if I'm a recruiter and I'm getting like a C attached, it's just cold and unpersonable. I've often told students, have your email be the body of the email,
Right.
Your cover letter be the body of the email, and then attach a PDF and your resume. That would work perfectly in a situation where it's, you know for sure it's leslie.goldberg@ogilvy.com or what have you.
Right. That's what I say too.
Just because if you open a cold email, it's like, it looks like the student or the candidate was lazy.
Yeah.
And I think it's when you're opening an email and it's a nice greeting and it's professional, I think that works. But having the PDF and the resume and cover letter attached with clear labeling as well. So your name _ job title, that, but then you should also have it teed up, because so many corporate websites, or when you're applying online, you need a plain text version. You need, just kind of getting a sense of what the upload factor is. If it's going right to a person via email, I think that's, doing the cover letter as the body as well as attached PDF of cover letter and resume. But if it's an online format, it's going to go to the right places either. And I think if it's, think of a cover letter as it is very specific to this position and this job. And I have to read that as a recruiter and know that you've thought about this company, you want to work here, you've matched your skills clearly without question, or at least piqued my interest enough to want to bring you in. But you've done your homework and you're between resume and cover letter a match. So think of it that way. If it's sort of that cold emailing or like referral email, then it still has the formal presentation to it, and it's maybe it's a hair more casual, but if you're reaching out to somebody you don't know, you maintain professionalism, and I would say that lengthwise that's shorter too.
Let me jump in there a little bit. So if you're one of my students and I say, oh, go contact Joe Smith, he'd be a really good person for you to talk to about this industry. It may look like that 3-paragraph cover letter, like the examples presented in this presentation, but it would be in an email form, especially if I give you the email, here's this person's email, reach out to them. The email would be your cover letter and your resume would be attached. As Ryan said, you know, if it's going to an online, some sort of an online submission, then yes, you need a PDF of a cover letter. But the other piece I was going to say about when Ryan said, you know, you write a cover letter and then you also attach it as a PDF. Keep in mind that sometimes the recruiting person, so they might work in human resources, so they're an HR person, and they may say, oh, this person's a good candidate, I'm going to send their cover letter and resume to the hiring manager, who may not be the HR person. So that in that transaction, the email may not go. It may just be the PDF of the cover letter and the PDF of the resume. So I think in that situation, you would write, the email would be your cover letter, but you would also attach the same thing with your resume. So you would be that email with 2 attachments. And that way, if the hiring manager, if the HR person wants to send it on, they're just sending the PDF of your cover letter and the resume. They may not send the email. So you definitely want to have that cover letter in its own form, you know, as its own document, even if you also send it as in the body of the email. Hopefully that makes sense. I think that makes sense. Any other questions?
We do have one last question that has come in. When it comes to asking about like internal referrals, when you're communicating with either an alum or someone that you're interested in connecting with, at what point is it appropriate to ask for that? And is it something that should be asked for in writing, or is it a verbal kind of confirmation conversation to have? Especially if you're planning on applying to a job, at like what point is it appropriate to kind of bring that up?
Once you're within a company, like at an internship. Is that Misha, is that you think what the
no, so it's just coming from networking or outreach. Like at what point in your communications is it appropriate to ask for like a referral from that individual to apply to the company?
I see. Okay. Yeah. Good question. Okay. So I think it's important. Obviously, you have to establish a relationship with that person first. So if you do, you know, some sort of a Zoom networking conversation with someone, I always recommend that students never leave that conversation without saying, is there anybody else I should talk to? Is there anybody else in the company who you think I could learn from? So that's, I think, an appropriate question after that very first connection, not in the first communication, but once you have the conversation with the person. So once you've talked to them on the phone or on Zoom or in person, if that ever happens. So you've established that connection. I think if you see a job, if you've already talked to a person and you see a job at the company that opens up, I think at that point, usually what I tell people is apply through the appropriate channels. So if it says apply, you know, through our web portal, you apply there, and then you can reach out to the person that you know and say, I've applied. I just want you to know that I've applied. I thought you might be interested to know that I've applied. So that's if there's an opening that you're interested in. If there's not an opening, I think it depends a little bit. Ryan, you can jump in on this too. I think it depends how good is your relationship with that person? Is this someone that you've interned, like did you intern for them last year and you've stayed in touch and now you're graduating and there's a job? I think at that point, it's right. You know, I have graduating seniors all the time who interned with somebody the previous summer. And, you know, they send that update email. Hey, it's hard to believe a year has gone by since I worked with you. This is what I did my senior year. I'm now graduating. I see, you know, that there are some openings at Havas Media. I would love to be considered. It's perfectly fine to let someone that you know when you're ready to graduate, that you're graduating and you're job hunting. Like, it's nothing to be embarrassed about if you're a graduating senior and you're job hunting. Every graduating senior is job hunting unless they're going to grad school. So it depends a little bit on the relationship. Brian, do you have any more thoughts on?
Yeah, so I think, you know, it's always a good closer in that initial conversation with someone. So if it's somebody that Leslie's put you in touch with, or, you know, if you're a student I've worked with and I can connect you to somebody, you know, we'll try. That's not always a guarantee, though, just to clarify. But, you know, if you've made a connection with somebody, and you've gotten that initial conversation, I think a couple things. Never miss that opportunity to close that initial meeting with what Leslie said. Is there anybody else you think I should be talking to? Any professional associations? Any people at your company? Any, you know, people at other you've worked with that are now at other companies? That kind of thing. And then I would also say, you know, you have to, and this is a skill that just develops over time. In your networking, whether it's written communication, whether it's email, whether it's Zoom call, you have to take time to, yes, you have an agenda of making points about who you are and you're trying to network and learn about opportunities, but you have to learn to read the room and get a sense of, okay, what I'm really picking up here, you know, and this is an internal monologue, what you're picking up is that this person definitely wants to help. They're booked through December. So I'm going to follow up post the holiday season and loop back and then shoot, you know, an email about this topic. Or they may say, they may give you people right away. If this is a person you've been working with and they've given you referrals, do not ever reach back out for more help if you haven't completed what people have given you, if that makes sense. So if you haven't made contact with the people that they've given you already or the other referrals, please do not ask for more help because it looks horrible. But I think, you know, the main thing is reading the room. Never leave that initial conversation without just expressing your interest, being grateful, and asking for more connection. But it may be, you know, it may be something that has to wait. So that should go in like a contact log so that you can follow up and it's on your calendar to loop back with that person.
Yeah, and just one follow-up quick thing. I will often give students names of people who if I give a student a name and I don't reach out to that person and ask for a favor, like I just give the name and I don't tell that person that I'm giving the name, and the student doesn't reach out, there's no harm done. But if I reach out to someone and say, hey, would you, sorry about my cat, and I say, hey, you know, would you talk to this person for me as a favor? And then that student doesn't, and I make a virtual connection and that student doesn't reach out, that's upsetting.
Yeah.
Because I'm going out of my way to connect that student to someone. And I do that a lot, not just with people I know professionally, but with friends. And, you know, so that's just more of an etiquette thing. It's less about.
That's a number one life lesson etiquette rule for sure. And so with these examples, you know, thank you again, Leslie, for an awesome presentation.
Oh, my pleasure.
I think, you know, I'm sure that this has turned a lot of more questions and thoughts in your mind as you're thinking students about, you know, how can I engage further? And there's going to be situations that come up. I mean, I tell students that I'm working with all the time, don't hesitate to reach out for a quick question or shoot an email. Hey, this is the specific example of networking that I'm doing right now. Here's what I've done so far. This is my question. Like a really succinct email to me about that. You know, we can help you. If you feel like you're at the very beginning level and just need to kind of knock over the stumbling blocks, we could go over some of that in a virtual appointment too via Zoom. So just things to think about. But thank you so much for participating today. And
thank you. I'm happy to see some familiar names. And you can also reach out to me. My email is here on this slide. Ryan knows everything. I know less than everything, but I'm happy to answer if I can, and if not, I'll refer to Ryan.
Definitely. So enjoy the rest of summer. Keep your eyes peeled for some of the other things we have going still on handshake events and that. And we have a lot of new stuff coming for you this school year, and we're here for you. So just don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks again, everyone, and we will see you on the next one.